Good afternoon. I'm Ilsa Connect, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Policy for the National Center for Victims of Crime. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Untested Rape Kits, the Issue, the Impact, and the Response. This webinar is brought to you by the Rape Kit Action Project with support from Thermo Fisher Scientific. And I want to let you know a few things about the system that you're participating in today. The audio should be streaming over your computer speakers, so hopefully you are hearing that. You want to turn on or adjust the volume on your computer. You can send us a message in the Q&A box if you're having audio issues, and we'll try to walk you through the way that you can get your speakers to work. Other housekeeping issues, you can also call WebEx support if you're having technical problems at 866-229-3239. Everybody who entered the webinar today is muted upon entry, and so you are in listen-only mode. We will not be able to ask questions verbally, but we do welcome questions at any time during the presentation. You can also use the question and answer box on the right side panel of your screen to ask us a question, and we will answer questions at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you by email. I also want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be posted on our website in a few days. And here's the address, victimsofcrime.org/DNA/training. So I want to introduce our speakers today. We have three speakers. Natasha Alexenko is a sexual assault survivor who was highlighted in HBO's critically acclaimed documentary, Sex Crimes Unit. In 2008, nearly 16 years after she was violently attacked at gunpoint, her perpetrator was found through a DNA match, thanks to the dedication of New York City's cold case unit. Natasha's rape kit was backlogged for almost 10 years. Natasha currently serves as the founder and spokesperson for Natasha's Justice Project, and she'll speak about that in a moment. Rebecca O'Connor joined the Rape Abuse Incest National Network, also known as RAIN, in 2013 as the Vice President for Public Policy. Early in her career, she worked in Massachusetts state government as counsel to the Senate Budget Committee, and then as the policy liaison for the Massachusetts Office for Victim Assistance. Becca has held leadership positions at the Parkinson's Action Network, the American Association for Justice, and the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And now I have to introduce myself, which is slightly awkward. I am the Deputy Director of Public Policy for the National Center for Victims of Crime and the Director of our DNA Resource Center. For the past 3 years, I was the project manager for an Office on Violence Against Women funded grant to ensure a victim-centered response to the problem of backlogged and untested sexual assault kits. The goal of that project was to give communities the tools they need to create a victim-sensitive approach to sexual assault kit backlog reduction. So I want to go ahead and give the floor to Natasha, and she will begin our presentation today.
Thank you, Elsa.
Hi.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. So I'm just so honored to be here and talk a little bit about my story, talk a little bit about the backlog of rape kits, how it affected my life, and of course all the survivors out there throughout the nation who are fighting along my side that I'm certainly honored to know. So first off, I think the most important thing that affected me is really partnerships. It's the partnership we're witnessing today, working with RAIN, Natasha's Justice Project, and the National Center for Victims of Crime. I think that that certainly helped in the beginning when I was initially assaulted, and it helped through the healing process, and it kind of continues on. I, of course, began as a layman, not really understanding DNA evidence or how it worked. And through becoming an advocate and my journey into that, I've really learned a lot, and I'm certainly grateful to not only the three organizations that are here today, but the law enforcement officials and the prosecutors out there who continue in my education. So a little bit about my story. I'm a sexual assault survivor. I was raped, robbed, and sodomized at gunpoint in 1993 by an unknown assailant. To to say that it affected my life is an understatement. I think we're all the same way. We have certain expectations for the path our life is going to take, and this certainly took me off the path. In hindsight, it's taken me onto a new path that I'm very grateful to be on, but at the time it shattered my world. It not only shattered my world, but it affected the individuals who loved and cared about me, my family and friends, and even the individuals in the apartment building I lived in, many of whom moved after my assault took place in the apartment building. I went through many years struggling, living in fear, knowing my perpetrator was not only out on the streets and could reoffend to me, but I also felt a sense of helplessness, knowing the high recidivism rate for rapists and knowing there was no doubt in my mind that the man that raped me would continue to harm other individuals. And I felt like my hands were tied because despite the fact that I went through a grueling rape kit test, that nothing was being done. And I was really pleased to receive a call from the district attorney in Manhattan, the office there, in 2003, saying that my rape kit was about to be tested. This was nearly 9.5 years after the event, and the innovative prosecutors decided to do a John Doe indictment so that we could essentially stop the clock on the statute of limitations, which at that time in New York was 10 years. So that was very innovative and certainly something that changed my life because in 2008 there was a match in CODIS and we found the man that raped me, and he was prosecuted, and a jury of his peers said he was guilty of the crimes he committed upon me so many years ago. The other thing is, there's some consistencies in my story that I hear from survivors across the nation and law enforcement, and that is the man that raped and robbed me at gunpoint was a recidivist, but more importantly, he was not a specialist. He did not necessarily stick to the crime of rape. He was on a nationwide crime spree. He created a host of victims throughout the country. He was a burden on taxpayers. He was a burden on law enforcement. He was negatively affecting society. I was just so very grateful to the hard work in the prosecutor's office. And I have to say the person I am today is really due to watching how altruistic they were fighting for my case, that they didn't give up. And that was just so inspiring, and I really became an advocate watching them and learning from them. And I'm just really pleased to say that they're not alone throughout the country. I've met some phenomenal prosecutors, law enforcement officials, and technology groups that are just really working hard to make a difference. And I think that the only way that we can make a dent on the backlog is to kind of come in together and utilize our skills to really put an end to the problem, which I really believe we can do. So again, to the inspiration of so many people, in my case in New York and throughout the country, other survivors, I started Natasha's Justice Project. Our mission is to eliminate the nation's backlog of untested rape kits and empower survivors of sexual assault through education, advocacy, and funding. So primarily what we do is threefold. One, we work with education, with higher institutions of learning. I go out and speak throughout the country. I'm very blessed to do that. And we actually have chapters of NJP forming in universities. I think that's a tremendous group to get the word out, talk about sexual assault as a whole on campuses, and also talk about the backlog of unprocessed rape kits. We also do advocacy, such as really imploring law enforcement officials, government officials to pass legislation, and finally funding. And what we do there is we pick a municipality to serve as a pilot project of sorts. We help them find the funding to eliminate the backlog. At present, we're working with Alameda, California, and we're assisting in eliminating the backlog there of their nearly 2,000 rape kits. At present, we have submitted 117 of their nearly 2,000 kits into testing through a private laboratory. So certainly we're looking forward to hearing those results, and again, a tremendous partnership there with the district attorney in Alameda County. So, of course, we were very honored to be approached by RAINN and NCVC, two amazing organizations with a wealth of information and knowledge about the backlog to form the Rape Kit Action Project. We're understanding that part of this change is not only changing attitudes and empowering law enforcement and prosecutors, but also putting laws into effect that will help on a state-by-state level count the kits, because we really can't do anything until we have a handle on how many kits are out there. And certainly we've been really pleased at seeing how many people are out there fighting for this, again, all the way from survivors to prosecutors to law enforcement officials. It's been quite an inspiring thing to watch. Now, of course, this is an image of kits sitting on shelves in county storage facilities. I will tell you that myself, along with, I would say 99% of the survivors that I know, have their kits stopped and stuck right here. They have yet to leave the storage facility. None of the individuals I've met have had their kits weighed at a lab. This is where they kind of stop. And I think what's heartbreaking to me is knowing that each of these kits represents a human being whose body was a crime scene. Each kit could potentially represent a criminal who is creating a burden on society and law enforcement, and each kit contains a story, someone's heart that was broken, someone who's perhaps found difficulty in moving on, and that's something that we certainly need to pay attention to. That we need to work on, and we need to bring justice, not only for those survivors, but for the people in this country who certainly want to have a safe and happy, fulfilling life. And I think we certainly owe it to the nation. But I think that this slide is something that really has taken, especially over the last 3 years that I've been doing this, kind of a secondary place in terms of my vision and what I'm seeing, because again, there's so many people fighting hard to make a difference. And this is the vision I see today, and that is just one of many photos I could share with you of people who are fighting hard. This is Assembly Bill 1517. We worked hard, the Rape Kit Action Project, along with Natasha's Justice Project and the California Coalition for Sexual Assault, on this bill, supporting Nancy Skinner, who is a phenomenal assemblywoman who will not back down, despite the fact that this bill has come forward on several occasions and been vetoed in the past by the governor. Also in the photo is District Attorney Nancy O'Malley, who are working with in Alameda County, who again is just so inspiring and in working very hard, again, not only for the individuals living in her jurisdiction, but the survivors, and recognizing that what happens in her community affects the nation as a whole. And she really is fantastic, and I know she, again, is one of many. I could probably spend this entire slideshow showing you pictures of people who are working hard, and so this is certainly one of many, and I think this is really overshadowing the first image I showed you of the backlog rape kits, because these are the images that I fall asleep with in my head. There are so many communities making a difference, and I will say that I'm a layman, and certainly my colleagues Elsa and Rebecca will do a much better job than I at presenting the statistics and the figures. And I guess I kind of serve as a translator, if you will, taking it from the technical part and communicating it to the general public. And, you know, one of the counties that has certainly been an inspiration to me is Cuyahoga County and what they're doing and how hard they're working. It's certainly not an easy task, and I think what makes it difficult is, nobody is pointing fingers or placing the blame, and this is not about that. It is just really about supporting jurisdictions, supporting advocacy groups who are fighting hard to change things in their communities. One thing I'm certain of is Ohio is not an anomaly. I think, again, Memphis, which we heard about and we'll probably talk about further, is not an anomaly. We want to know how many other Ohios, how many other Memphises are out there nationwide. But you'll see here they're working really hard to make a difference, and the workflow is evident. They're working hard to investigate these cases, and there's certainly some challenges that they have to work with. But from a layman's perspective, this is the thing that really interests me, and that's the conviction rate, which is 69%. DNA evidence is new, but we know what a powerful tool it is. It's not only something that prosecutors use, but it is certainly instrumental in the investigation process. It's certainly a tool that law enforcement can use to close cases that perhaps they thought led to basically emptiness. So that's fantastic. And I think part of the power of the DNA is what it does. So when you break down the conviction rate and you see the pleas, which are 45%, and because DNA is inarguable evidence. You were there, you committed the crime. Perhaps the only thing that can be said is an issue of consent. But when you're looking at a 45% plea, which is a very high number compared to the trials at 24%, you're looking at a victim who may not have to go to court and face her assailant as I did, and you're also looking at it not placing a burden on the court system. You're not looking at someone having to go into court, lawyers and so on, that not only back up our courts, but also cost taxpayer money. And also, using the same example, is the number of serial rapists in indicted cases, 35, 25, 21%. That's telling. We know this. We know this time and time again that the rapists are recidivists. They're going to commit this crime over and over again. And I think that other communities that have tested their kits are pretty forward with the fact that, oftentimes it'll be one offender that's committed 5 or 6 crimes, if not more. So we know that we are able to identify serial rapists. Oftentimes a serial rapist that rapes a known offender, a known victim will go on to assault somebody they do know. And again, the breakdown of the defendants indicted, known convicted offenders in CODIS, of course, at 59, John Doe DNA profiles at 37%, and then the unknown males at 18. So what's really telling about this, too, is as the nation continues to test the backlog of rape kits, and as we add more profiles into CODIS, we're hoping these John Doe indictments, or these John Doe profiles will become known convicted offenders. They're in the system, clearly recidivists, so there's got to be a way of identifying these individuals and getting them off the street. And finally, just to end, what each of you do by participating in this webinar is show that you're interested, that you want to learn more, and certainly you will by my colleagues who I know do a great job of presenting the facts and figures. But I really hope you'll come away with this and recognize that there is a human being behind every single sexual assault, and each human being also represents a family and a group of people that love them, coworkers, their communities, and so on. And that when you empower them and test their rape kits, they go on to do amazing things, whether it's advocacy or helping other individuals, or really just even supporting politicians who are pushing forward legislation within their states and the nation. We can be amazing tools. We can be amazing allies, and we're certainly grateful. The 2 individuals I'm showing in the slide happen to be females. Certainly men are victims of sexual assault as well. But to the left of your screen is Carol Bart from Texas. Carol is an amazing woman who has a very strong voice in this cause and who continues to inspire me and law enforcement within Texas. Unfortunately, Carol's kit passed the statute of limitations. Her perpetrator was not able to be charged with her crime, but her perpetrator went on to sexually assault his granddaughter. Unfortunately, something that could be avoided had Carol's rape kit been tested earlier. But Carol is still pleased that her rape kit was eventually tested, and she did get the closure she really was waiting for so many years. And she was able to speak at the sentencing of this terrible individual. She was very, very grateful to receive that tool for her healing process. And to the right is Helena Lazaro, who is from California, another survivor of sexual assault who was raped at knife point at a car wash. Her kit remained untested past the statute of limitations, and her amazing prosecutor, who was very innovative, was able to get the man that raped her on a charge of robbery because he did steal $20 from her, which Helena, who has an amazing sense of humor, says is the best $20 she ever spent. So thankfully he's behind bars. And what's really interesting is he was found because he sexually assaulted his wife, and they were eventually able to find him because the prosecutors in that case decided to go forward and process that particular kit, even though it was obviously a known offender, and they were able to give Helena closure by testing that kit. So these are really two amazing women. There are amazing men and women across the country whose voices matter, who are very grateful to all the strides we made. Again, I really believe positively that we're very close to making a difference, and I've just never seen so many people working so hard from all sorts of disciplines across the country to make the difference. And I think the very fact that we have so many people listening to this presentation is a really great sign that we're onto something big and we're onto something good, and I look forward to being on that journey with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. This is Ilsa Connect again. I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue and get us all a little bit on some common ground with terminology. It seems that every week we see a story, in the media about untested kits that are discovered in law enforcement jurisdiction or law enforcement evidence rooms. And really the story of backlogs are not new, but this side of the story, the untested sexual assault kit issue, is really the current national crisis. I want to just say that the two issues, although they're very related, are different, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's often confused in the media and by criminal justice professionals and even victim advocates and lab personnel. The untested sexual assault kits are really a separate and different issue from DNA backlogs at labs. Untested or unsubmitted sexual assault kits are in law enforcement custody and have never been forwarded to lab for analysis. So the kits that we often call backlogged are kits that are sitting in a lab in the queue. And the Department of Justice defines a backlog kit as one that has been sitting more than 30 days and has not yet been entered into CODIS. So when we talk about untested or unsubmitted kits, what we're really talking about are kits that have been taken at a hospital from a survivor, and as Natasha said, the survivor's body is really a crime scene. And then they sit in evidence rooms, logged into evidence, but they're never forwarded to the lab. So really the difference is that the kits that get to the lab are kits that somebody has decided have probative value or have value for a criminal justice case and should be tested. The kits that sit on law enforcement shelves are really kits that have been forgotten. And I'll talk in a minute about why kits are not tested. But I wanted to make sure that we clarify a little bit about really the Rape Kit Action Project. We're focusing a lot on these untested or unsubmitted sexual assault kits, and I often refer to it as the darker side of the DNA backlog because, once again, these are kits that have been shelved and have not even seen the queue at the lab. So really how many kits are out there? And you see pictures like this. I could pull a million of these from the web. It's amazing. And I know that I've been to evidence storage rooms and seen this. And when you see these floor to ceiling. It's really quite overwhelming. We really don't have a current national number of untested kits. And one of the things is that backlogs or untested kit numbers are really not static. They change constantly because new evidence is coming in and evidence is being tested and going out, but we really don't have a really good current number. You may have heard the 400,000 sexual assault kits number in the media. It's really actually quoted quite often. It was originated from the Attorney General Gonzalez during the Bush administration, and he used it in a speech. But right now, that's the only citation that we can find for that number. So from the Rape Kit Action Project perspective, we really don't like to use that 400,000 number because we don't really have a good solid citation for it. We know a few things about untested kits. A 2009 Department of Justice sponsored report of 2,000 law enforcement agencies found that 18% of evidence related to unsolved rapes has not been submitted to a lab. So we have that number. And then we have to really just extrapolate from cities and states in the news. And we see this on TV quite often. You can find clips like this all over the web. You know, it's Salt Lake City. It can be Denver, Colorado. Of course, this is Houston. We all know, many of us know the story about the Houston untested kit crisis. What we do know is that the state of Texas, thanks to their legislation that required an audit, that there are at least 20,000 kits across the entire state of Texas. There could be more because we know that only a certain percentage of law enforcement agencies in the state of Texas have responded by counting their kits and submitting that information to the State Department of Public Safety. But this is the number that the Texas Department of Public Safety says they believe is sitting in law enforcement jurisdiction across the country. We all know from the news that Memphis has 12,000. Detroit and Houston, of course, are the NIJ Action Research Project sites. You can find information about those projects on the NIJ website. Nancy Ritter wrote a very good piece about those projects, and those cities have 12,000 or 11,000 and 6,000, over 6,000 in Houston. Cuyahoga County in Ohio, which includes Cleveland, they've submitted about 4,000 to their state lab, and there's more across Ohio. We don't really have, I don't have the solid number on that right now. As Natasha mentioned, Alameda County, 2,000, Phoenix, we hear 3,000, Denver, San Francisco, Hollywood, Florida, just in the news a couple days ago, Salt Lake City, Utah. The list really does go on and on. I will say that New York City had 16,000 and completed their testing. Of course, Natasha's sexual assault kit was part of that untested kit crisis. And Los Angeles, more than 6,000, and their testing is complete as well. And we see lots of examples of justice being brought to victims through testing those kits. I have a couple of webinars on my website that do talk about the New York City untested kit and backlog experience, and Martha Bashford, a prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office, now chief of the sex crimes unit, talks about the cases that they saw through testing their kits. It's pretty fascinating. So why do we have these untested kits? I want to say that my travels across the country talking to communities and really looking at this issue, I've discovered that past my anger, I realized that there really are some legitimate reasons why kits have been sitting on shelves. That's not to say that they shouldn't be tested, but many of us know, of course, that lack of resources is at the top of the list, that they're really it costs a fair amount to test rape kits, and so money is definitely an issue. Crime lab staffing is an issue. New cases coming in and taking priority is an issue. So all of these things factor into why kits stay in law enforcement custody. We also do know that there are different rules for submitting evidence across the country. So in some places, this is changing, but I have heard the lab saying, don't submit cases from known offenders to us. And I just talked to a community recently that said their lab is still asking them not to send known offenders. So those do go and sit on shelves. I have also come to understand that DNA testing, as we know it now, and the DNA databases that we use for criminal justice investigations really were not available in many places. CODIS came online in 1988, and New York State in about 2000, I believe. They were connected to the CODIS system. So any kit that was collected from an unknown offender case was very challenging to find that offender unless you had something like the DNA database. So once that DNA database came online, you could submit the unknown profile of the assailant in those cases and hopefully have it connect to a known profile in the database. But thinking about the fact that so many kits were collected in the 80s and early 90s, there really, in many cases, there wasn't a real justification for testing those kits at that time. And I always tell places that I talk to, well, you know, I'm thankful that you had the foresight and the understanding to keep those kits. So in some places, when we look at kits from the 80s and 90s, we need to thank those communities for not throwing them out, because some communities have. So also debate in the field about known offender cases, whether or not we should be testing those. So again, some places have a policy not to test those kits. What we have been seeing in many jurisdictions, including New York and Cleveland, that sometimes testing those known offender kits actually do hit to other cases. So we might find what we call serial acquaintance rapist, where the person is actually raping people that they know, different people that they know, or they're committing stranger crimes as well. We know, as Natasha said, they're not specialists, and they don't stick to one type of crime. Uncooperative victim. Of course, there are many versions of what this means, and we see this over and over again in some of the case files. And what uncooperative means can mean many different things. In some cases, it really does mean the victim does not want to have anything to do with the case. In some cases, as we've discovered, it means that after 2 or 3 tries, the investigator couldn't find the victim, and that got listed as uncooperative victim. And in some cases, I have heard labs saying, don't send me kits from uncooperative victims. We don't want to deal with that. I think that is changing. And also lack of knowledge about DNA databases and sex offender patterns. There was, again, that 2009 NIJ study found that 44% of respondents said that if there were no suspect in the case, they did not send the kit to the lab. And if this is post-DNA databases, it's pretty shocking. That's exactly why the DNA database really was created, is to find investigative leads in cases in which you don't know who the offender is. So 44% not sending in those cases. And not understanding, again, that sex offenders do not silo. In other words, they don't commit one kind of crime and they don't rape one kind of person. We do know they're not specialists, and we know that they rape strangers and they rape non-strangers, and they prey on the marginalized people in our society. So those are some of the reasons. Lack of training regarding sexual assault, pretty obvious. But again, not understanding the dynamics of sexual assault victims and perpetrators. And then we also have, of course, not taking sexual assault seriously and not believing or blaming victims. A lot of this is about bias. And in many of these cases we've seen coming out of Cleveland and coming out of Detroit, these survivors, their kits were shelved because they were really from the wrong side of town, or they were working as prostitutes, or they were heavily involved in drugs. So that was not prioritizing sexual assault as a serious crime, no matter who the victim is. So those are some of the reasons that we see across the country for untested sexual assault kits. Again, some more legitimate than others. This is a quote from a woman that was in a roundtable discussion I had where I met Natasha with 11 survivors whose sexual assault kits had been untested for many, many years, some decades. Again, Carol Bart, her kit was from the 1980s. She just said, you know, just for once, I'd like to see an end to committee meetings and research. Just get it done. And I think that this is really was an inspiration for a lot of the work that I've done and RCAP forming around this idea that at this point, we just need to start moving forward. And so we formed the Rape Kit Action Project to support efforts across the country to pass legislation addressing these untested or unsubmitted sexual assault kits. So in December 2013, we sent a letter to state legislators across the country, letting them know about the project and offering our assistance. And Becca will talk about what came out of that in just a few minutes. What are the legislative options? What should a state like yours do if you think you might have untested kits? Well, first of all, I want to just go back for just a minute and just say, I have talked to several states when this all came about, the Rape Kit Action Project, and we sent our letter. I talked to states that said, you know, our lab says we don't have any untested kits. We really have no backlog. And again, it goes back to the terminology. And we spent a lot of time on the phone talking about the fact that sometimes the labs might not know what is going on in the police evidence rooms. And you may find that there are places across your state that have been shelving large numbers of kits, and the lab is just not aware of that. So just to kind of make sure that you understand, again, that difference of perspectives between, you know, what's backlogged and what's untested and why does this happen. So some of the things that you can do, one is simply counting, just going in and auditing the sexual assault kits in your state, in your community, can mandate submission and testing of old kits, and you can require testing of all or certain sexual assault kits going forward. So what does an audit really mean? Well, it means counting. And I got a little slap happy when I thought about that, and I found this picture of the count with number 1 there, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if really we only had one untested rape kit? But in terms of counting, really, or auditing, it's the same thing. That is a great place to start. California, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Virginia all recently enacted audits. Illinois and Texas all have been through audits, and Colorado as well. So basically, these laws usually require a count and a report to the legislature. And the great thing about this is that it does give you a base for funding and then further legislative action. And you will really know then what you really have and what the numbers are you're dealing with. You can pass a mandatory testing law. Some of these will require testing of all kits. Some will require testing of certain kits. The 3 states in the country that have them now, Illinois, Texas, and Colorado. And I want to mention real quick that we did a webinar with experts in Illinois and Texas about the Illinois and Texas law and some of the challenges that they ran into, and that is available on our website as well. So now Becca is going to talk about some of the state-level actions that we have seen this year and a little bit about some federal legislative tie-ins as well. Oops, Becca, are you there? Okay, I'm sorry, I think we're having a little issue with sound. We need Becca to be unmuted. There we go. Thank you. Hi, Becca.
Hi. Hi, everybody. So thanks so much, Elsa and Natasha. It's a real pleasure to be here today to finally get a chance to talk to all of you about these issues. I am obviously bookending some really great information that you've already received, and there may be a little bit of overlap, but my goal is really to build on what you've heard and talk a little bit more, get a little more into the weeds about RCAP and what we've seen in terms of action, because it is the Rape Kit Action Project. So in the space of state efforts, as Elsa mentioned, there are a number of states that have already taken affirmative steps in the policy realm to get to these issues, and they tend to pick, as Elsa went through, from a menu of options in terms of how they approach this. So I wanted to provide you first with a general overview. You know, Ilsa talked about a couple of these laws of what was already on the books prior to, and I'm sorry, this is as of May. I hadn't had a chance to edit it, but hasn't changed much. But what was on the books when we came to the table and said we need to be helping and supporting those states that haven't yet tackled this issue legislatively. So just to walk through some examples of what is on the books, I wanted to highlight a couple of states that have really been leaders on this front. So starting with, and you'll see here on the slide, I do have little snapshots of you know, the broad categories that Ilsa sort of outlined about what they might be looking into or legislating on. California is an example of an overachiever in this space. So California recently enacted a law that calls on the state auditor to conduct an audit, as Ilsa talked about, of 3 to 5 counties that they have to select to, among other things, evaluate existing statewide policies and take a look at them for testing and provide a report that's supposed to look into not only how they're working but make recommendations for how we can improve upon that process. And so it's a deep dive. The report also has to just talk about how funding has been filtered into this issue, and it's worth noting that some states, Texas as an example, have also, for lack of a better phrase, anteed up and put state resources directly into this issue. So I think it was about 11 million, it might be 13 million, might be mixing my numbers, went into the Texas state budget in the last fiscal year to go toward backlog reduction efforts. But going back to California, they also took on the issue of victim protections. So back in 2003, California was the first state to pass something along the lines of a DNA victim Bill of Rights. So that really codified that, victims have a role in this process and should, and as Natasha said, they are the reason we're here, and they and their family members are the ones most directly impacted. So it's important to bear that in mind when you're legislating around this. And California did so by requiring, and some other states have done so, some notification thresholds. So when a kit, for instance, is submitted for testing, some states have said you've got to pick up the phone, you've got to let the survivor know what's going on. Or in some instances, they've even said if you're not going to proceed with testing, you have an onus to go back to that person and let them know. And of course, we're also cognizant of the fact that some victims may not want that notification at particular points. So it's just something that states have been very proactive in thinking about in some fronts, and something that we've had discussions about with RCAP. And they're not finished yet in California, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But they're still trying to pass additional laws. Moving on to another example, however, Colorado is another state that's been really active in this space. So in 2013, Colorado passed a law that required law enforcement agencies to submit to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation an inventory of untested sexual assault kits in active investigations. And that same law also called on the Colorado Department of Public Safety to create rules governing sexual assault forensic evidence, and required the Bureau of Investigation to develop a plan for analyzing all unanalyzed kits that they identified through that audit I mentioned. That's another trend that we are definitely seeing, where states are saying, okay, look, we don't want to just be reactionary. Clearly, we have a proactive and a reactive response here, but let's, before we become the headline, if we haven't already, let's really step back and think about what our policies need to be. Are we a test all kit state? Are we not? Are we, going to set timelines in terms of how quickly these things need to be turned around at one space or another? So it's been encouraging to see that kind of discussion occurring at the state level. It's not an easy one, but it's important in our opinion. Colorado is also requiring sexual assault testing to be done at the victim's request, and mandates that evidence has to be submitted to a crime lab within 21 days of law enforcement receiving it. So they're one of those timeline states. And finally, this is a state where the law requires law enforcement to provide notification to victims as well when evidence is being submitted for testing. So literally just a snapshot. We have limited time. I want to allow time for questions. Happy to talk about other states and what their laws are. But in the interest of time, I also wanted to – hello? Okay, sorry. I also wanted to move on to just talking again about what we've seen in the wake of our launch of RCAP. So Ilsa covered this. In 2013, we launched RCAP. We sent a letter to state legislators. And the response was pretty overwhelming for what is a very short session for most states in this year. We got a flood of calls, requests for technical assistance and support, and I would say we heard from nearly 20 states in just a matter of weeks, saying, let's talk. We may have a problem. We know we have a problem. Regardless, we want to know what we can and should be doing to be proactive here. So those are the states highlighted here, ones that we've had active conversations with recently. And then I'm sorry that this is cut off a little bit, but this is to indicate that a number of states not only said we want to do something, but they put their money where their mouth is, and they started to introduce bills. So in at least 12 states, we saw legislation move that we know was informed by this team, RCAP. And of course, some actors are doing their own thing of their own volition. But we were really encouraged, again, in a really short, they only had so many weeks in some states to get something done. And some folks obviously were filing placeholder legislation knowing that the conversation would be continued. But in a couple of states, we even saw laws pass. So Virginia's one. I know we talked about it a little bit earlier. But, you know, that's really exciting that people are starting to get fired up about this. And, you know, Natasha mentioned California and Assemblymember Skinner. So they're not done, as I said. They're currently in California weighing a proposal that, and they should be highlighted here, I apologize, that would require all sexual assault evidence to be submitted for testing within 5 days of collection, and further require the lab to have DNA profiles that result from that uploaded within 30 days of receipt. So I know Natasha mentioned this has been, a version of this has been introduced a couple of times and vetoed by the governor, but again, there are advocates like those we've talked about today that are, and hopefully you on the phone, that aren't willing to just sort of step back and let it die. They keep pushing for this, so hopefully we'll see some traction. And then a number of other states also, as I said, passed bills and introduced bills. So, for instance, that Virginia bill requires an accounting of all unsubmitted kits and a report to the legislature in early 2015 about what was found. And that was a direct result of some of the conversations that we were having with RCAP. So a lot of states have finished their sessions. Other states, there's still some pending action, and in 2015, we're gearing up because we expect, you know, we're in ongoing conversation with staffers that just couldn't get a bill together for this session, want to do it and do it right, and so we're advising. And if you're interested, please reach out to us because we'd love to talk to you. Turning quickly to federal efforts, because it wouldn't be right not to mention that the federal government certainly has put a lot of attention on this, especially lately, and done some really important work in supporting these efforts. One piece that is near and dear to my heart at RAIN, and as a part of RCAP, you know, we certainly are keeping an eye on, is the Debbie Smith Act, which is the Debbie Smith DNA Backlog Grant Program enabling legislation. So as the slide says, this puts grants out to states and local units of governments to help them in this process. So this really gets to that, I wouldn't call it the lighter side, playing on Ilsa's words, but, you know, the labs, you know, that are trying desperately to get the processed kits through or get the kits processed, and they need support. This is a heavy endeavor, especially when you discover, oops, we have thousands of kits that haven't yet made it through. And so Debbie Smith Act is an absolutely essential piece in the pipeline, making sure that those resources are there. And as the slide says, it's up for reauthorization, and we're working really hard on that, so feel free to ping us if you'd like more information about how you can be helpful. The SAFER Act, which passed as part of VAWA 2013, so the reauthorization, is something that is incredibly exciting. It amends the Debbie Smith Act and basically says, not only are we going to make sure that there's more money available and going to that casework, that capacity building at the labs, but we want to support efforts to figure out where those kits are and get some numbers so that we can really target our resources and be smart about this. And so soon we expect the National Institute of Justice, which is already hard at work on this and doing great work to get this rolling, to issue a grant or solicitation so that folks can avail themselves of funds to support those law enforcement audits of kits. And then the federal government is always talking about a budget, so why wouldn't they be now? But they are in the throes of debating the fiscal year 15 budget. And just as a side note, you've got DNA funding, the pool of money that has traditionally gone toward these issues, you know, roughly level funding is what we anticipate for that pool, and that includes funding for the Debbie Smith Act and some other programs that deal with DNA. and then a new proposal of, we'll just call it $41 million for efforts to be determined exactly how this language plays out, but also this is a new proposal where Congress is saying, in addition to what we're already doing, we want to put more money toward the rape kit backlog issues. And we're incredibly excited to see how that plays out. We just have to get Congress to keep their eye on the ball and move that bill because it gets log jammed, as so many things do here in DC. And so with that, I will turn it back to Natasha.
Well, again, thank you, all of you, for joining us today. And in particular, I want to thank my panelists for just really helping teach me a lot about the issues. And again, as was mentioned, the Rape Kit Action Project team was really put together to push forward legislation on a state-by-state level, and we've really received a larger reaction than we thought, certainly than I thought. And if you're interested in pushing forward, again, we just have some tremendous information, talking points, model language, and case examples and statistics. Really, between RAIN and NCVC, as you probably noted by hearing them speak, they are just a clearinghouse of information. And I know that they're probably able to answer any questions and more. And again, just pointing out that there's just some really innovative technology coming out. I think that we have to recognize our partners in innovation for really fighting as well. Besides the legislators and the advocates out there and the law enforcement officials, there's a host of labs and research that are doing tremendous research to really help everything from speed to bringing the cost down and helping with solutions. So we certainly hope you'll contact us with any questions, or if you're interested in pushing forward a legislation. Again, we're aware of the model language necessary and what will work and what works best. And I know these have been tested time and time again by my colleagues. And again, most importantly, we know that survivors of sexual assault are victimized, and I think part of the issue of the unprocessed rape kits is it's almost like a re-victimization of those survivors. So again, thank you so much. I know that each and every one of you on this call today is here because you're interested in learning more, and you're supporting this issue in whatever way you can. And I'm certainly looking forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Can you actually advance the slide, or not advance the slide, sorry. I have to get to a new slide, but we'll leave this up here for a minute so that people can get email addresses here. We do have a few questions. I'll start with the first one, which is, I think, about the statute of limitations. So either one of you can answer this. It says, is there a date line as to when the rape kits excuse me, are supposed to be in for testing? And if so, does the time frame affect the outcome of the test or legal procedures? So we're talking about statute of limitation issues. And Natasha, I think maybe you could also talk a little bit about the importance of testing kits that are beyond the statute of limitations and what that means for survivors like Carol Bart.
Yeah, certainly. The statute of limitations is clearly something that is problematic. When I've spoken to prosecutors, of course, one of the reasons that was put in place is before DNA, when we were looking at human beings' recollection of something that could have happened years ago. So certainly not the case. DNA is kind of around to stay. So I know in my case, again, the prosecutors who were very innovative did a John Doe indictment to stop the clock on the statute. In New York City, State, they eliminated the statute in 2007. I know that other states are doing the same nationwide, one by one. And of course, once a kit has, passed the statute of limitations, that individual cannot be charged for the crime. But in Carol's case in Texas, and I believe other states are doing the same thing, you're still offered the opportunity at the sentencing to give a victim's impact statement, and the judge can take that in consideration when sentencing the perpetrator. So that's very effective for closure purposes as well. And I know that other states are doing similar things where they're kind of getting around any statute by offering victims an opportunity to speak, offering them a podium, if you will, and that's been really effective. But I've seen certainly in the last 3 years states really coming forward and saying, okay, wait, we got to get rid of this statute. Which is typically, from what I've seen, 10 years. I know California, and perhaps either Elsa or Rebecca can go into further detail. I know California, for example, has kind of altered the statute. If there is DNA evidence, the statute is kind of extended. But I hope that answers your question, and Rebecca, feel free to come on in with your more specific things.
I think you covered it really well there, Natasha. I don't have much to add. I would just say that, excuse me, I would say that states absolutely, as you noted, are taking a look at that and being very mindful when they craft their policies, and it's something that we talk to lawmakers about so that they can really evaluate how best to make this a policy that will be not only practical but achieve the greatest likelihood of serving justice in that process.
We also, at the National Center, did a chart on statute of limitations, so that is available on our DNA Resource Center in terms of what the statute of limitations are and some states that have DNA exceptions. So you can find that on our DNA Resource Center. We do have a question about known offender kits. I mentioned that some labs were not accepting known offenders, and I can't say that I know what the policy is now for some of those labs, but I think many of them are coming around to the fact that putting known offender DNA profiles from known offender cases into the database does solve crimes, and sometimes these guys, again, are raping people they know, but they're also raping strangers. Do you, Natasha or Rebecca, want to add anything to that?
Well, one thing that Nancy O'Malley, as a prosecutor, said to me, which really affected me, was kind of a paradigm shift for me, was that, we certainly, if it's a case of a murder, we're not differentiating whether the murderer was known to the victim or not. I'm not certain. I understand certain rationale for not testing kits where it's a known offender. But I do know, again, I speak to survivors across the country and even across the world, and oftentimes their perpetrator has committed offenses if they're unknown to the person I speak to someone they know, because I guess the question warrants is if the man that raped me at gunpoint, why wouldn't he rape his girlfriend, his spouse, or someone that he did know? A predator is a predator, and they use a variety of weapons to accomplish the deed, whether it's alcohol, whether it's kind of manipulating their victims into feeling comfortable with them. So I think that, and it's just telling when we see municipalities that are testing all kits, what happens, and that is various kit-to-kit matches, and again, rapists not being specialists, you end up finding a lot of closure in a lot of cases in a lot of different crimes.
Okay, let's see. Another question. There's a question from somebody that I know from Iowa who asking about anonymous kits. So the question is, when you refer to kits sitting in police storage facilities that are untested, are you referring only to cases where the victim did report? And the answer is we don't really know, because in some places they are lumping in those kits with the kits that were not anonymous reporting cases. So, for example, in Cleveland, some of the anonymous kits that were collected have actually been forwarded and tested, and in some places they are doing that, and some places they are not. So it's hard to know exactly jurisdiction to jurisdiction what is being lumped in. But I have talked to one other city with a large number that is forwarding their anonymous kits for testing, and this is a big issue that at the National Center we've been working on over the last year, and it's a very challenging issue, and I think we are thinking about doing a webinar specifically on that. But feel free to reach out to me if this is something that's happening in your community. I've collected some information about anonymous cases and how many convert into reported cases. I've collected some forms that might be helpful and also some guidelines from other states. So it's opening a can of worms to kind of talk about that right now. But the answer to that particular question is we don't really know if these numbers are including those anonymous kits as well. Let's see, I think that's really it for our questions. Becca or Natasha, do you have any parting thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to all of you for listening and encourage you to please reach out to us, you know, and if you're interested in learning more, especially those of you who are on the ground doing the work and you're hearing your state's name come up in these conversations or you saw it highlighted on states that we're talking to, you know, we don't do this in a vacuum, and certainly, especially to those of you doing the policy work, you know, it's important that we collaborate and coordinate these efforts. So if we haven't already reached out to you, please feel free to touch base. And I also just want to make a plug. We also have a database on RAIN's website for states' laws, and that includes statute of limitations information as well. So if you cross-reference ILSA's chart and our chart, you'll probably get a pretty in-depth overview. So thanks again.
Yes, thank you everyone for all you do. We know you're working hard.
Okay, well, I want to just remind everyone that the webinar was recorded, and so it will be available on our website. We are standing ready to assist you in any way that we can dealing with untested kits in your community. So with that, I want to say everyone have a great afternoon, and thank you for joining.